Reflections: The Fight for Social Justice in America. Media is one of the most powerful and enduring factors that emphasize and create American cultural values and norms. Television played a particularly large role in the past 50 years in setting and reinforcing the shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize American society. Gender and ethnic stereotypes were reinforced in shows like All in the Family and Fat Albert, as well as in cartoons and talk shows. On the other hand, sitcoms such as That Girl and the Mary Tyler Moore Show challenged the gender stereotypes surrounding the status of single women and the larger role of women in American society. In the footsteps of such actresses as Hattie McDaniel, Diahann Carroll starred in the groundbreaking show Julia, which also questioned traditional women roles. Like McDaniel in her many roles, Carroll was the first African-American actress to star in her own television series where she did not play a domestic worker. The show was controversial because it was the subject of constant criticism that it did not realistically portray the lives of blacks in America. Diahann Carroll continuously defended in an interview, saying that it was a fantasy and that very little on TV showed life as it really was. Julia may have been ahead of its time, and when The Cosby Show premiered and became a mega hit, the American public showed that it finally was ready for a show of its type. Landmark steps made by such actresses as Diahann Carroll, Marlo Thomas, and Mary Tyler Moore created paths for women to break the strong stereotypes that surrounded their individual culture and identity. Ellen DeGeneres was one of the women to follow one of those paths.
No major problems, nothing pressing. What kind of vibe do you get from me?
Tension.
That's right, tension. I have tension, yes. You can read vibes. Yeah, good. No wonder you have a degree on your... You do have a degree, don't you? Oh, Yale. Couldn't get into Harvard, huh?
You made that same joke last session, Alan. Is there something you want to talk about?
Well, as a matter of fact, yes. Yeah, you know what I hate? I'll tell you what I hate. I hate when people make assumptions about you, you know? I mean, especially when that you is me. It's not like I haven't had boyfriends, you know, just because I don't happen to have a boyfriend right now. You know, it's just I'm choosy. What's wrong with me? If I wasn't choosy, I'd be Mrs. Larry Gladstone, wife of my 8th grade boyfriend.
There is nothing wrong with being choosy, Ellen.
Right, exactly. And it's not like I'm looking for perfection, you know. I just want somebody special, somebody, you know, that I click with.
And obviously...
No major problems, nothing pressing. Click with.
And obviously you didn't click with Richard. Has there ever been anyone you felt you clicked with? And what was his name?
Susan. Click with.
In the late 1960s, a more socialistic liberation philosophy started to create different factions within the civil rights and black power movements. This liberation philosophy also engulfed the gay rights movement. A new generation of young gay and lesbian Americans saw their struggle to join a broader movement to dismantle racism, sexism, Western imperialism, and traditional mores regarding drugs and sexuality. This new perspective on gay liberation had a major turning point in New York City with the uprising of the gay residents of Greenwich Village against police discrimination and brutality. The Stonewall riots of 1969 served as a radical catalyst for the gay liberation movement and spurred new activists like Harvey Milk to further politicize the movement. Milk became the first openly gay man to be elected to public office in California as a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors.
Somewhere in Des Moines or San Antonio, there's a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that she or he is gay, knows that if the parents find out, they'll be tossed out of the house. The classmates that taunt the child, and the Anita Bryants and John Briggs are doing their bit on TV, and that child has several options. Staying in a closet, suicide, and then one day that child might open a paper and it says homosexual elected San Francisco, and there are two new options. The option is to go to California, San Antonio, in fact, 2 days after I was elected, I got a phone call. The voice was quite young. It was from Altoona, Pennsylvania. And the person said, thanks. And you've got to let gay people so that young child and the thousands and thousands of life of that child know that there's hope for a better world. There's hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, the only gays, but those blacks, the Asians, the disabled, the seniors, the essence, without hope, the essence give up. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, so without it, life is not worth living. And you gotta give it hope.
In 1963, Betty Friedan published her book The Feminine Mystique, which continued the tradition of such women's rights activists as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Harriet Tubman. Friedan typified a new or second wave of feminist activists who saw an inextricable link between women's culture and the political inequalities which reflected sexist power structures. Friedan encouraged women to exercise their political power in all aspects of their personal and professional lives, as consumers, teachers, homemakers, mothers, and voters. Another political writer of the 60s was Carol Hanisch, who together with Friedan built on these ideas. Hanisch coined what was to become the theme of second-wave feminist activism: the personal is political. One of the first things we discover in these groups is that personal problems are political problems. There are no personal solutions at this time. There's only collective action for a collective solution. I went and I continue to go to these meetings because I have gotten a political understanding which all my reading, all my political discussions, all my political action, all my 4 odd years in the movement never gave me. I've been forced to take off the rose-colored glasses and face the awful truth about how grim my life really is as a woman. I am getting a gut understanding of everything as opposed to the esoteric intellectual understandings and noblesse oblige feelings I had in other people's struggles. This is not to deny that these sessions have at least 2 aspects that are therapeutic. I prefer to call even this aspect political therapy as opposed to personal therapy. The most important is getting rid of self-blame. Can you imagine what would happen if women, blacks, and workers would stop blaming ourselves for our sad situations? It seems to me the whole country needs that kind of political therapy. That is what the black movement is doing in its own way. We shall do it in ours. We are only starting to stop blaming ourselves. While second-wave feminism professes to support the equality and respect for all women, many minorities did not feel that their cultural perspectives and challenges were being acknowledged. Numerous black feminist writers, including Toni Morrison, argued that some forms of this feminism were incomplete. They addressed sexism and class oppression but ignored racism. Through racial bias, these ideas of greater gender freedom conversely discriminated against many of the same women for which they purported to stand. Black feminists contended that the liberation of black women entailed freedom for all people, since it would require the end of sexism, class oppression, and racism. What do black women feel about women's lib? Distrust. It is white, therefore suspect. In spite of the fact that liberating movements in the black world have been catalysts for white feminism, too many movements and organizations have made deliberate overtures to enroll blacks and have ended up by rolling them. They don't want to be used again to help somebody gain power, a power that is carefully kept out of their hands. They look at white women and see them as the enemy, for they know that racism is not confined to white men, and that there are more white women than men in this country, and that 53% of the population sustained an eloquent silence during times of greatest stress. Faces of those white women hovering behind the black girl at the Little Rock School in 1957 do not leave the retina of the mind. When she was interviewed by Nikki Giovanni last May in Essence magazine, Ida Lewis, the former editor-in-chief of Essence, was asked why black women were not more involved in women's lib, and she replied, The women's liberation movement is basically a family quarrel between white women and white men, and on general principles, it's not good to get involved in family disputes. Outsiders always get shafted when the dust settles. On the other hand, I must support some of the goals, equal pay, child care centers, etc. But if we speak of a liberation movement as black women, I view my role from a black perspective. The role of black women is to continue the struggle in concert with black men for the liberation and self-determination of blacks. White power was not created to protect and preserve us as women, nor can we view ourselves as simply American women. We are black women, and as such we must deal effectively in the black community. Until the late 20th century, the term Asian American was adopted mostly by activists, while the average person of Asian ancestry is identified with his or her specific ethnicity. Much of the bias and discrimination that Asian American community has faced and continues to battle surrounds around the widespread perception that Asian Americans are not American, but are instead perpetual foreigners. This issue came to a head in 1982 in Detroit when Vincent Chin, a 27-year-old industrial draftsman, was fatally battered by two auto industrial workers. It is reported that one of the workers instigated the incident by declaring, "It's because of you little motherfuckers that we're out of work," referring to U.S. auto manufacturing jobs being lost to Japan. This was despite the fact that Chin was not even Japanese. The lenient sentence given to the two men through a plea bargain generated public outrage as the murder, which included blows to the head from a baseball bat, possessed many attributes consistent with hate crimes. Asian American activists such as journalist and news personality Helen Zia, who extensively covered the Vincent Chin case, have shed light on the injustice rife within the Asian American community. Zia rallied against how Asian Americans were not only portrayed in the media, but also how they were treated on a daily basis. Where is the line between the strange and exotic and the Asian invasion yellow peril? The most harmful and malicious reports cover the whole spectrum of racialized commentary. As congressional Republicans prepare to attack Clinton and his China policy by highlighting alleged security breaches by Chinese-American scientist Wen Ho Lee, the Washington Post ran a story on March 21, 1999, headline, "Chinese Spy Methods Limit Bet to Find Truth, Officials Say." The story did not directly quote a single official, but instead noted, China spying, they say, more typically involves cajoling morsels of information out of visiting foreign experts and tasking thousands of Chinese abroad to bring secrets home at a time like ants carrying grain of sand. The Chinese have been assembling such grain of sand since at least the 4th century BC, when the military philosopher Sun Tzu noted the value of espionage in his classic work, The Art of War. If sophisticated journalists and political leaders find it so easy to abandon good judgment and accept uncritically such strange and exotic absurdities, or to take that downhill spiral into the Asian invasion yellow peril journalism, what are Biff and Buffy likely to think? That their Asian American neighbors are rummaging through their garbage, sending every grain of sand home? Or that their missing pet has made it into my dinner table? Some will reach those unfortunate conclusions, just as clever pundits and talk show hosts will exaggerate stereotypes without regard to how they are contributing to the racial harassment, taunting, and even acts of violence committed against Asian American school children and anyone who is different. All Americans have an interest in a fair society that upholds its promise of equality and justice. At the same time, it is the special task of the Asian American population to put America on notice that we will not accept racial prejudice and discrimination against any people, including our own. The work of Zia and other activists created a legacy for later Asian American generations to challenge the perceptions and stereotypes placed upon their communities.
Then there were people who didn't understand the concept of Asian American. I went on a promotional tour for the TV show, and I went all over the country, and I went to one morning show, and the announcer said, "Hey Margaret, we're changing over to an ABC affiliate, so why don't you tell our viewers, in your native language, we're making that transition." So I looked at the camera